Hey guys, so this is our final little video on Unit 3. So we want to go ahead and just talk about percents. So percents, they are pretty much anything that represents 100. So right here I have 100 blocks that are really crooked. And so just to kind of go ahead and give you some kind of visual and some background, if this block, this row was shaded in, that's going to be, these are 10 rows across and then 10 rows up and down. So that's going to be 1/10, right? So that's going to be like, that's 1/10 of these blocks, but that's also going to be represented as 10% of those blocks, because it's the same as 10 over 100. So that's going to be 10% of these blocks are shaded in. Now, let's say that there's going to be this 30, okay? So if we are trying to find 40% of 30, we could use this grid right here to represent the whole, which of course will be 30. So if the 30 is going to be divided into the 100 parts, that means that instead of each block being 1, these all represents 1, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 100. Instead of that, they're now going to be representative of 0.3, because 30, that's going to be what the 30 divided by 100 is. So what we're going to say is that if each block now represents only 0.3, we're going to say that what is 0.3 times 40. So that's how we're going to, that's one of the ways that you can figure it out. It's honestly, I'm sure you could probably tell it's not my favorite way to figure it out. This right here will equal 12. So that means that 40% of 30 is 12. I don't really care for that way, but it is the more fundamental way whenever you're looking at the blocks right here. The easiest way, now, y'all ready for this? So the easiest way is going to be using a calculator. But I did want you to see that this is, all percentages just think of this block. It's just 100 blocks, okay? So whatever we're talking about, if it's 40%, we'll have another one. If it's 48, we'll have it, all the way down to here, colored in. And so just think about it like that, okay? So let's go ahead and just look at some examples so you can get a little bit better understanding, and I'm making a little more sense. So preteens, teenagers grow about 30%. They get about 30% of their height between the ages of 9 and 14. If a child is 4 feet tall at age 9, how tall can we expect them to be at age 14? So this right here is what we'll do. So we'll say, okay, well, we got 4 feet. And you are going to take your calculator and you're just going to multiply it by 0.30. And it's kind of the same thing that kind of happened up here. But the thing is that just make sure that if you are representing, if we're trying to figure out what 30% is, going a little crooked there, just remember, if it's 30%, hopefully you can see this. I'm talking about 30%, okay? That's what I tell them. This right here, it kind of looks like a 100, just kind of flipped around. So like, here's the 1, and then here's a 0. And then there's the other 0. So think of this as like 30 over 100, okay? So if it's 30 over 100, the biggest thing, the quickest way that you're going to be able to turn percentages into decimals, if it is over 100, you're just going to, here, so when we're talking about the number 30, any kind of decimal, let me just make that, I should have brought a pen up, I'm sorry guys. Any kind of decimal, this is the whole number. It's going to be after the 30, right? So if we're talking about 100, we need to go back 1, 2, because there's 2 zeros. Okay? If we were needing just a tenth, we would just go back 1, but there's 2 zeros, so we need to go back 2 spaces to make this into a decimal form. So that's how you're going to make sure you do all of your problems that have percentages in it is you're going to multiply the number by the percent. And so what that equals is 1.2. But 1.2 what? Like, what are we talking about? This is where it's going to get really helpful if you remember to write down your units. 1.2 feet is what we're talking about. So that's not the answer. Okay, so we don't necessarily, 1.2, we're not expecting them to be 1.2 feet at age 14. So what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to take that 1.2 and we're wanting to add it to the 4 feet because he or she was already 4 feet. Now they're an extra 1.2 feet. Okay, so what 4 feet plus 1.2 feet equals 5.2 feet. So 5 feet, 2 inches. All right, here's another one right here. LaGrange receives an estimate of 75 rainy days per year. So we got to remember our units. So a year is going to be 365 days. What is the percentage of days a year that LaGrange receives rain? So we're trying to figure out how much rain does LaGrange get on a percentage basis. So we're going to take 75 and we're going to divide that by 365. So 75 days is rainy days, and then we have 365. But why wouldn't we just, it says per year, so why don't we just divide it by 1? Well, remember, we want to make sure that we're making sure that we have equivalent units. So if we're talking about days, we need to divide by days. We can't divide days by a year because it's not going to give us the right amount of time. So we're going to make sure that we do that. Now, we're trying to figure out what is the percentage of days that LaGrange receives rain. So since we are trying to see what the percentage of days that we have rain is, the 75 is the divisor, okay? No, that's the divisor. This is going to be the dividend. So make sure that whenever you're figuring out, we're going to be practicing this a little bit more tomorrow, but you just need to make sure that you're seeing how 75%, that's we're trying to figure out what is the percent of that. So because we're trying to figure out the percent of that, we need to put it inside, okay, the little house. All right, so last minute calculator rules. I hope that didn't confuse it before. But the first goes first. So normally, if most of your problems, almost all your problems, the first thing that's going to be in a problem is going to be inside the house. Okay, now whenever you're putting it in a calculator, you put what's inside the house first. So for this problem right here, you would write that out in a calculator. You would type that as 75 divided. You would type in 75, then you would push the divided by sign, then you would type in 365 days, and you'll see that gives you the answer up here. Okay. So, and then up here, because I forgot about this, but because it was a percent, right? It was a decimal. I need to change that word. I'm not saying what is the decimal. I'm saying what is the percent. So again, it's over 100. So we got to go over 2. So it's 20.5. So I guess that's 20.5, 21. All right, moving the decimal point. I really just kind of got into that just a second ago. Make sure you're moving the decimal point over 2 and back to when needed. Okay, you're converting that. We're going to be practicing that a lot tomorrow with a really fun activity. And then always double check. So put your answer back in there. And most things with math, you're going to be able to put your answer back into the problem and make sure it just works out. Reread the question whenever the answer is known to make sure it makes sense. Guys, if y'all would have just said it was 0.2, just think about that. That's less than 1%. So 75 days of 365, well, that's not right. That's not less than 1%. Less than 1% will be, if we're talking about 365 days, will be less than 365 days. It's not even one day, right? So we need to make sure that, just reread the problem, make sure that it makes sense to you. And so that way you know that, you're doing the best that you can, and that it makes some logical sense. Because sometimes we can put something in wrong at the calculator. Let's say if we flip-flop these, well, that's not going to make any sense. So you need to make sure that you're rereading the question, just to make sure that it just makes some sense. So guys, we'll be having a couple of fun activities. Please make sure that you are taking this stuff seriously so we can move forward. We will be having visitors a few times this week, as well as the filming a lot. So just make sure that we're staying on top of everything. And if you have any questions, please feel free to give me a call. All right, thank you.